Daniel sat alone in the cockpit of his small ship, watching the endless black sea of stars stretch out before him. It was supposed to be a simple supply run, nothing more than a quiet journey across safe trade routes. He leaned back in his chair, half relaxed, listening to the hum of the engines. But then, without warning, the radar lit up with red dots. At first only one appeared, then 3, then 10. Within seconds, the entire screen was filled with signals closing in fast. Daniel's hands tightened on the controls as his ship shuddered, the sensors screaming alarms. They had found him, and he knew who they were. These were not pirates or smugglers. These were warships from the Zorith fleet, one of the most feared alien factions in the Outer Rim. The void around his ship grew brighter. As massive alien vessels slipped out of the darkness, they moved like shadows with metal skin. Their hulls lined with glowing patterns that looked alive. Daniel's small transport had no chance against them. He could not run, he could not hide. He whispered to himself, steadying his breath. Escape was impossible. The ship jolted hard as a tractor beam locked onto it. Controls froze under his hands. The power drained, and the stars outside twisted as his ship was dragged toward the alien mothership. For a moment, everything went quiet. Daniel sat still, his eyes sharp, his face calm. He did not beg, he did not panic. He simply watched. The Zorith soldiers boarded with metallic footsteps that echoed through the corridors. They were taller than humans, their skin dark like stone with sharp glowing veins running across their arms. Their eyes burned like embers, filled with mockery and hate. Daniel stood in the center of his ship as they surrounded him with weapons raised. One of them laughed in a deep growl, calling him fragile. Another pressed a weapon to his back and shoved him forward, speaking in their own tongue, certain he did not understand. Daniel remained silent, but his eyes followed every move they made, storing each detail in his mind. They dragged him through the long, cold halls of the mothership. The ship was vast, alive with low hums and strange lights crawling across the walls. Daniel walked with his head high, though his wrists were bound by a glowing cuff that shocked him when he moved too quickly. He saw the alien crew staring at him as he passed. Some pointed and sneered, some looked at him with curiosity, but none saw danger in him. To them he was just a human, weak and fragile, caught like prey. The commander, a massive figure with silver armor embedded into his skin, approached Daniel and bent low to study him. His voice rumbled like thunder as he told the guards to lock the human away until interrogation. Daniel simply stared back, unblinking. They pushed him into a dim cell with metallic walls and a narrow bench. The door sealed with a hiss, locking him inside. Alone now, Daniel sat down, his hands resting on his knees. The silence of the cell wrapped around him. From outside, he could still hear the faint voices of the guards laughing. They believed he was harmless, a powerless prisoner who could do nothing but wait. But Daniel was listening. He had counted their footsteps, memorized the sound of the locking system, and even noticed that the guard who stood closest carried the access card carelessly at his side. Every small detail sank into his mind. His face remained calm, but his eyes flickered with thought. Time passed slowly inside the cell. The artificial lights dimmed and brightened, marking the cycles of the alien ship. Food was brought once, carried in by a guard who mocked him as he slid the tray inside.
Ow.
Daniel barely touched it. He was not hungry. Instead, he studied the pattern of the guard's movements, the way his weapon was clipped at his side, and how he leaned lazily near the door. He noticed how the hallway outside had a blind corner just a few steps away, where a shadow could hide. These details were not mistakes. They were opportunities. Daniel leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Anyone looking at him would have thought he had accepted his fate, that he was simply a broken man waiting for his end. But in his mind he was drawing maps, marking times and preparing steps. The Zorith believed they had taken a hostage. They believed fear was in his heart. But Daniel knew something they did not. He had no intention of staying in this cell, and no intention of letting them keep control. He breathed slowly, letting the silence sharpen his focus. On the other side of the wall, two guards laughed as they spoke in their guttural language. He joked about how humans cried when tortured, how icily they begged for mercy. They had seen many before him, and they thought this one would be no different. But what unsettled them, though they did not admit it, was how quiet he had been since his capture. He had not shouted, not begged, not spoken a word. He had only stared at them with those sharp human eyes, eyes that seemed too steady for a prisoner. The laughter of the guards echoed down the corridor. But Daniel only listened, far above the prison deck. The alien commander met with his officers, discussing how long it would take to break the human and force him to give information about Earth. They were certain the process would be easy. Humans were fragile, their minds weak under pain. But even as they spoke, one of the officers frowned and asked if it was wise to underestimate him. The commander dismissed the thought, shaking his head. To him, Daniel was nothing more than a small victory, a trophy to display. Yet deep in the silence of the cell, the true game was already beginning. Daniel opened his eyes again, staring at the door. His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Zora thought they had captured a hostage. But the truth was darker. They had locked a hunter inside their own walls, and soon they would learn the difference. Daniel sat in the dim light of his cell, staring at the wall as if nothing around him mattered. The silence was heavy, but his mind was not silent. Every sound outside, every step of the guards, every hiss of the air vents was like a piece of a puzzle coming together. The aliens thought he was weak, but he was patient. He'd already learned more in a few hours than they could imagine. He knew how long each guard stood watch. He knew the rhythm of their boots on the metal floor, and he knew which one carried the keys to his freedom. He had no tools, no weapons, only his eyes, his memory, and his calm. But that was enough. Daniel's stillness was not surrender. It was a waiting game, and he was good at waiting. Outside the cell, two guards were laughing again. Their deep voices rumbled through the metal. They laughed about how long the human would last, betting on whether he would cry during interrogation, or stay silent until the second strike of the whip. Daniel listened to their tones, the rhythm of their words, the way their laughter faded as they walked farther down the hall. He closed his eyes and repeated their routine inside his head. 3 minutes of laughter, 5 minutes of silence, one returned step, then a shuffle near the door. He smiled faintly. They were predictable, and predictable enemies were already half beaten. Hours passed, but Daniel's patience never broke. The food came again, carried by a different guard this time. This one walked straight, no laziness, and placed the tray with a hard thud. His weapon rested on his hip, but his hand stayed close to it, ready. Daniel did not move quickly. He reached for the food slowly, his eyes never leaving the guard's face. The alien smirked, baring sharp teeth, then turned away. But Daniel's attention was not on his face. It was on the tiny panel near the door. He had seen it blink when the door opened. Simple access lock, powered by a card or command. He could almost feel the timing of its pulse. The door looked strong, but every lock had a weakness, and he had just found it. Daniel ate nothing from the tray. He pushed the food aside and stood up. He stretched slowly as though he were tired, but really he was measuring the space of the cell. He stepped across it twice, counted the length, and studied the ceiling. A vent ran across the top, small and sealed. He could not fit through it, but air meant connection, and connection meant sound traveled farther than they realized. He pressed his ear to the wall and listened. Voices faintly echoed orders, movements, and the clank of weapons. He was not trapped in a box. He was surrounded by information. The guards had no idea what he was doing. To them, he was just pacing. But Daniel's eyes caught every detail. The flicker of the corridor lights through the small window in the cell door, the vibration of engines in the floor beneath his boots, and the subtle weakness in the wall where the metal was thinner. Tapped it lightly with his knuckle, then smiled again. Weakness everywhere if you just knew how to look. That night, when the lights dimmed and the hallway outside grew quiet, Daniel lay down on the bench with his hands behind his head. To anyone watching, he looked almost peaceful, as though he had accepted his fate, but inside his head, he replayed the map of the ship he had been dragged through. He remembered every corridor, every turn, every door. He remembered the placement of weapons, the number of soldiers, and the hum of the engines. He was not only memorizing the ship, he was planning how to move through it. When the time came, the aliens had planned to interrogate him soon. He knew. They would bring him out, chain him, and try to break him. They thought pain would open his mouth. Daniel was ready. He'd been trained for worse, and pain was no stranger to him. But he would not wait for them to choose the time. He would make his own. He knew the guard who laughed too much was careless, and careless guards made mistakes. So that guard would be the first to fall. As the hours passed, Daniel slowed his breathing, listening again to the cycle of the guards. Steps near the door, a pause, shuffle, silence, steps fading. Then the second guard replaced him, his boots heavier, slower. Daniel counted every second in his mind. He could almost see them through the door even though his eyes were closed. He whispered under his breath, timing his own heartbeat to their movements. Soon, very soon, the alien commander above slept soundly in his quarters. Believing his prisoners secure, his officers joked in the mess hall about the fragile human who sat alone in the dark. But none of them realized that the human had already begun to hunt them from inside his cell. They had locked him up, but he was the one studying them. He was the one planning. When he finally moved, it would be fast, silent, unstoppable. Daniel sat up again, the dim light casting a shadow across his face. His eyes glowed with determination, calm but sharp. He pressed his hand against the cold wall and whispered softly, though no one could hear him. "You think I am your hostage?" he said under his breath, "but I am only waiting. When I move, you will not be ready." He leaned back again, closing his eyes. The cell was silent, but inside his mind the plan was alive. Every piece was in motion, every step calculated. He only needed the right moment, and then the tables would begin to turn. And so Daniel waited in silence. While above him, an entire army slept under the false belief that they were in control. They had no idea that in the darkness of one small cell, their greatest mistake was already preparing his first strike. Daniel sat on the narrow bench with his head bowed, as if sleep had finally taken him. His breathing was slow, steady, like a man who had given up hope. But under that stillness, his mind was sharp and ready. He had waited for this moment since the first time the cell door had closed behind him. He had studied the guards, memorized their routines, counted the steps of their boots on the metal floor, and marked the exact second when their shift changed. Now, in the dim half-light of the alien mothership, Daniel felt the moment arrive. It was time to move. The sound came exactly when he expected it. A soft hiss as the lock disengaged, followed by the heavy shuffle of a guard's boots. The careless one, the one who laughed too loud. Daniel kept his head low, pretending to still be half asleep, as the guard stepped inside with a tray in one hand and his weapon carelessly hanging at his side. He smirked, muttering in his guttural alien tongue, certain the human did not understand. Daniel lifted his eyes slowly, just enough to catch the guard's face in the weak light. Calm, sharp, ready as the guard leaned down to place the tray on the floor. Daniel moved. His body snapped alive with sudden speed, every muscle coiled. From hours of patience, his hand shot out, grabbing the guard's wrist and twisting it hard. The tray clattered to the ground, spilling food across the cell, but the sound was muffled by Daniel's next move. He pulled the alien forward, driving his shoulder into the creature's chest and using the guard's own momentum to slam him. Against the wall, the alien let out a short grunt, shocked more than hurt, and reached for his weapon. But Daniel was faster. He struck once, sharp and clean, at the side of the guard's neck. The alien staggered, then went silent, collapsing heavily onto the floor. Daniel crouched beside him, breathing steady, not wasting a single second. His hands moved quickly as he unclipped the weapon from the guard's belt and pulled the access. Carved from a small latch on his chest plate. He looked at the glowing cuffs on his own wrists, then at the device hanging from the alien's belt. A control switch. Daniel pressed it once and felt the cuffs loosen. He pulled them off, flexing his hands for the first time since his capture. Freedom, but quiet freedom. He could not afford to make noise. He dragged the unconscious guard to the bench and laid him there, pulling the alien's cloak partly over him. In the dim light, it might pass as a resting body for a few precious minutes. Daniel picked up the weapon, a strange rifle with a glowing core. He turned it over in his hands, testing the weight, then slung it across his shoulder. He slipped the access card into his pocket and crouched by the door. The cell door hissed shut behind him with a faint glow as he slid the card across the lock. For the first time since his capture, Daniel stepped into the corridor outside. The hallway stretched long and silent, lined with strange symbols, pulsing faintly on the walls. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor. Somewhere above, alarms waited to be triggered. Daniel stayed low, his steps soft, his eyes sharp. He moved like a shadow. Down the hall, 2 guards were standing at the corner, their voices low. Daniel froze, pressing his back against the wall, counted their words, listening to the rhythm. They were distracted, one tapping a clawed finger on the wall as the other laughed softly. Daniel's mind calculated 2 targets. Distance 10 meters. Noise would echo, so he had to be clean and silent. He looked at the small panel on the wall, a power node humming with faint light. An idea formed. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of metal he had taken from the tray earlier. He had bent it into a sharp edge without the guards noticing. Now he used it like a wedge, prying the panel loose. The hum grew louder as sparks flickered. He pressed the card into the slot, and the panel blinked red, shorting out for a second. The lights above flickered, and the 2 guards turned their heads in confusion. That was all he needed. Daniel moved fast. He closed the distance like a predator, the rifle silent in his grip. The first guard barely had time to blink before Daniel slammed the weapon stock into the side of his head, dropping him instantly. The second raised his claws, but Daniel pivoted, striking him low in the gut, then drove his knee into the alien's face. The second guard fell without a sound, crumpling to the floor. Daniel dragged both bodies into the shadows, covering them with their cloaks. The flickering lights returned to steady glow, leaving no sign of struggle, except the silence that followed. Daniel's heart was steady, his mind sharper than ever. He was moving through their ship, not as a prisoner, but as a hunter. He took deeper into the corridors, the more control he gained. The Zorith soldiers believed their ship was unbreakable, but Daniel had already broken their first layer of defense. He had a weapon, an access card, and the advantage of surprise. They thought they held a hostage. In truth, they had unleashed something far worse. As Daniel slipped farther into the ship, the hum of voices grew louder. Saw a group of aliens gathered near a larger chamber, their backs turned as they argued over some report. He crouched. Behind a pillar, his eyes narrowing. He could not fight them all yet. Not here. He needed to move smarter, strike harder, and vanish like a shadow. His chance would come, and when it did, they would realize the truth. For now, Daniel melted into the corridors, silent and unseen, his weapon ready and his mind clear. The first strike had been made and the game had changed. The hostage was gone. Only the hunter remained. Daniel moved deeper into the mothership, each step measured, each breath controlled. The air was heavy with the smell of metal and heat, the hum of engines echoing like a heartbeat through the walls. He kept to the shadows, sliding along the dark corners where the alien lights did not fully reach. The rifle on his shoulder felt strange, built for alien hands, but it was still a weapon, and that was enough. He had already taken down 3 guards without raising an alarm. He was hunting, and the ship had become his ground. Far ahead, voices carried through the hall. A group of soldiers stood in the glow of blue light, their weapons resting casually as they laughed and mocked their prisoner, the fragile human. They had no idea he was listening from just around the corner. Daniel crouched low, his back against the cold wall, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Above them, a pipe hissed with steam. To the left, a control panel blinked faintly. Every detail was a tool, every detail a trap waiting to be set. He pulled the metal shard he had kept hidden in his pocket, a small piece, bent and sharp, worthless to them, but useful to him. He slid it into the panel, twisting it until the lights flickered. The pipe above groaned, pressure building. The soldiers stopped laughing and glanced up in confusion. That was when Daniel moved. He struck the release valve with the butt of his rifle, and the pipe burst with a roar. Scalding steam rushed down the corridor, blinding the aliens and choking their voices. In the chaos, Daniel slipped forward like a shadow. The first alien never saw him. Daniel's arm hooked around its throat, pulling it back into the mist. A sharp twist, and the soldier dropped silently. The second staggered forward, coughing, trying to clear his eyes. Daniel's strike came fast, knocking the weapon from its hands before driving it into the wall. A hard blow to the head ended the struggle. The last one waved its arms wildly, blinded, shouting warnings into the cum. Daniel crouched low, slamming the rifle into its legs and bringing it down. A precise hit ended its cries. The mist cleared slowly, revealing 3 bodies on the floor, but the corridor was quiet. Daniel's eyes remained cold. He dragged the soldiers into the shadows, covering them with their cloaks. He knew the others would come searching soon. His moves had to be swift and invisible. Already alarms whispered faintly in the distance, a low tone rising through the metal. They had noticed something wrong, but they did not yet know what. The thought made Daniel's pulse steady with focus. They were beginning to feel the shift, the first taste of fear. Daniel pressed onward, deeper into the heart of the ship. He passed through narrow halls filled with pipes and wires, his steps soundless. Once he paused, pressing himself flat against the wall as 2 guards marched past. Their voices rumbled, tense now instead of mocking. Daniel waited until their footsteps faded, then moved again. He felt the balance tilting with every step. He was no longer the one hunted. He was stalking them. He found himself near a wide chamber where alien consoles glowed with strange symbols. Several soldiers worked there, their attention fixed on screens that tracked life signs across the ship. Daniel crouched above on a maintenance ledge, watching. His eyes narrowed as he saw his own cell flashing red on one of their monitors. They knew it was empty. Soon they would search. He needed to slow them down. Daniel picked up a loose metal bolt lying on the ledge, aimed carefully, then tossed it across the chamber. It clattered loudly on the far side. Instantly, 2 guards turned their heads, weapons raised. Moved toward the sound, Daniel dropped down behind them, silent as a shadow. His strikes were fast, precise. One throat crushed, one weapon twisted away, one soldier dragged into the dark before a cry could escape. The others panicked, their voices sharp with alarm, but Daniel had already vanished into the pipes above. They fired blindly into the shadows, but he was gone. From the ceiling, Daniel slipped through another vent and crawled into a narrow passage. The metal scraped faintly under his boots, but the noise of shouts below covered it. He moved quickly, emerging into another corridor. There he stopped, listening. The alarms were louder now, echoing through the walls. The commander's voice boomed across the ship, ordering every soldier to find the human. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. They had finally realized what he was. Not prey, not a hostage, something else, something dangerous. The corridor stretched ahead, empty for now. Daniel crouched low, checking the weapon in his hands. He had limited charge left, and he knew using it too much would reveal his position. Better to remain silent, to let his hands and mind do the work. He pressed forward again, slipping past. Another corner, then he saw a group of soldiers gathered in the mess hall. Unaware he was watching from above through the vent. They sat uneasy now, their voices lower, their movements sharper. They were speaking of him. Fear was in their tones. Daniel watched, memorizing their words, then turned and crawled away. He did not need to face them yet. Not here, he wanted. Their fear to grow, to spread like fire through the ranks. As he moved deeper into the ship, Daniel's face remained calm, his eyes sharp. He was patient. He was quiet. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. The Zora thought they had trapped him in their steel walls, but the walls now belonged to him. Their own ship was becoming his hunting ground, and somewhere far above, the alien commander slammed his fists against the table, shouting for answers. "Find the human," he roared. But none of his soldiers answered quickly. None wanted to. Walk the dark halls where a silent hunter moved unseen. Daniel's smile was small, hidden in the shadows, but his meaning was clear. The hunt had only begun. Daniel had moved like a shadow through the ship for hours, leaving silence and fear in his path. The guards no longer laughed when they spoke of him. Their voices were tight, their eyes restless, and their weapons always raised as they searched the endless halls. But no matter how many patrols were sent, they never found him. Only bodies, only the quiet proof that the human was near. Rumors spread quickly among the soldiers. Some whispered that he could vanish through walls. Others swore they had heard his footsteps behind them only to turn and find nothing. Fear was eating them alive, and Daniel knew it. He fed on it, using it, letting it guide their mistakes. The hunter had turned their ship into his hunting ground, and now it was time to strike at the heart. The commander sat in the war room, his massive form towering over the glowing table where ship maps hovered in the air. His officers stood around him, pointing to red alerts flashing across the screens. "He moves too quickly," one said, his voice shaking. "Every time we lock a section, he is already gone. He knows the halls better than we do." "Ah!" the commander growled, slamming his clawed fist down. "He is one man, one human. Do not tell me you fear a creature so small. Find him, capture him, and drag him here alive." But even as he spoke, doubt twisted in his eyes. He had underestimated the human once, and the price had already been high. Daniel was already listening, hidden in the shadows of the ceiling vents. He crouched above the war room, his ears tuned to every word. His eyes glowed faintly with reflected light as he studied the commander. This was the heart of the ship, the center of power, and if Daniel struck here, the entire balance would shift. He touched the weapon slung at his side, then paused. A rifle blast would be loud, too loud. He needed silence. He needed control. His hand moved instead to the knife he had taken earlier from a fallen soldier. Simple, sharp, and silent. The officers argued louder now, their fear rising. Some suggested locking down every corridor. Others demanded venting sections into space. The commander silenced them with a roar. "I will deal with him myself if I must," he declared. The words were still echoing when the lights flickered, plunging the room into shadow. The aliens stiffened, turning sharply, their weapons ready. But Daniel was already moving. He dropped from the ceiling like a ghost, his boots hitting the floor with barely a sound. Before the nearest officer could turn, Daniel struck, the knife flashing once, then silence. Another reached for his weapon, but Daniel's arm caught his wrist, twisting it hard before driving him to the ground. Panic spread through the room. As the officers stumbled back, shouting, the commander roared and raised his massive claw, but Daniel had already crossed the space. In one smooth motion, he pressed the knife against the commander's throat. The room froze. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the remaining officers. Daniel's eyes locked on the commander's, cold and unblinking. "You thought I was your hostage?" Daniel said, his voice calm and steady. "But I am not here to beg. I am here to end this." The commander growled low, his pride fighting against the blade at his throat. "You will not make it out alive, human." Daniel's grip tightened slightly, just enough to make the alien flinch. "Maybe not," Daniel replied, "but neither. Will you?" Daniel forced the commander down into his own chair, pressing the knife tighter. With his free hand, he grabbed the access console on the table and shoved it toward him. "The codes," Daniel ordered. "Unlock the ship's systems." Now, the commander hesitated, his burning eyes filled with rage, but Daniel's knife never moved. Slowly, with a low growl, the commander entered the command codes. The screens shifted, showing full access across the ship doors, power, navigation. For the first time since his capture, Daniel was in control. The officers looked on in horror. One tried to move, but Daniel's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and dangerous. "Sit down," he ordered. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of certainty, the voice of a man who had already won. The officer froze, lowering his weapon. Daniel turned back to the commander. "You dragged me here as prey," he said softly. "The one rule of hunters. Sometimes the prey bites back." He pulled the commander up by the collar and dragged him toward the door. The halls outside were empty, the soldiers too afraid to approach the war room after the alarms. Daniel moved steadily, his knife pressed firm against the commander's neck, forcing him forward. Every step echoed with power. He was no longer hiding, no longer creeping in shadows. He wanted them to see. He wanted every soldier to know the tables had turned. Voices rose in panic as they saw their commander being led by the human. Weapons were raised, but none fired. Daniel's eyes swept the crowd, cold and sharp. "Try it," he warned. The soldiers froze, their hands trembling. They could see the truth their leader's life hung on the edge of a human's blade. Slowly, one by one, the weapons lowered. Fear spread like fire across their ranks. Daniel stopped in the center of the hall, holding the commander tight. He raised his voice so all could hear. "You thought you had captured me. You thought you had broken me. But look around you now. I hold your leader. I walk your halls. This is not your ship anymore. It is mine." His words echoed through the metal corridors, heavy and sharp. Leaving the aliens in silence, the commander's eyes burned with hate. But there was something else now, something he could not hide. Fear. Daniel saw it and leaned closer, whispering in his ear so only he could hear. "This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." Then, with the codes already burned into his memory, Daniel shoved the commander forward, dragging him into the main control deck. The final stage was close, and the end game was his to play. Daniel entered the main control deck with the commander forced in front of him. The knife pressed sharp against the alien's throat. The vast chamber glowed with blue and red lights, screens filling the walls with data and ship diagnostics. This was the beating heart of the vessel, the bridge where everything could be won or lost. Dozens of crew members were already inside, their long fingers flying over glowing controls. But the moment they saw their commander in the human's grip, the entire room froze. Chairs spun, voices fell silent, and weapons slowly began to rise. Before hesitation, lock them in place. They knew what they were seeing. They knew the tables had turned. Daniel's boots echoed as he stepped onto the raised platform at the center of the room. He did not rush. He wanted each step to weigh heavy on the crew's fear. He stopped at the command chair and shoved the commander down into it, the blade still tight against his skin. The commander growled, but he did not move. His strength meant nothing with cold steel resting so close. Daniel's eyes swept the crew like a hawk watching prey. "All of you," he said calmly, his voice steady, "step away from the consoles." Now, for a moment no one moved. Then, one by one, the aliens pulled their hands from the controls and slowly backed away. Daniel's knife pressed harder in two. "The commander's neck. You will give me control of this ship," Daniel demanded. "Lock down your weapons. Open your navigation. You will do it now." The commander bared his teeth, his pride resisting, but Daniel's hand never shook. "Your soldiers already fear me," Daniel continued softly. "If I kill you here, their fear will consume them, will run like prey, and your empire will know you died begging." The commander hesitated. His pride fought, but he knew. Slowly, with a low growl, he placed his clawed hand on the console before him and entered the final override codes. The screens shifted, unlocking full access. Daniel's heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He had done it. The ship was his. Suddenly, a young officer shouted, breaking the silence. "We cannot let this happen." He lunged forward, his weapon raised. The crew gasped, but Daniel reacted like lightning. In a blur, he shoved the commander sideways and hurled the knife across the room. The blade spun through the air and struck the officer in the chest. He dropped instantly, his weapon clattering on the floor. Daniel walked over, retrieved the knife, and wiped the blood on the officer's uniform before turning back to the room. His voice was cold and sharp. "The next one who tries that will not even have time to scream." The room was silent now. No one dared to move. Daniel stepped back to the console, forcing the commander to stay seated. He tapped the glowing screen and studied the controls. Weapons systems, navigation charts, communication relays, all of it was before him. The galaxy had once seen him as a hostage. Now he was a man holding the most dangerous weapon they had ever built. Daniel opened the communication channel, the holographic projection glowing in the air. It connected across the ship, across every deck. Soldiers and crew everywhere froze as his face appeared, his voice filling every corner. "This is Daniel," he said, his words calm and steady. "You thought you had captured a human. You thought you had taken a hostage. But look at me now. Your commander is in my hands. Your ship is mine. And you will obey me, or you will all burn with him." The silence after his words was broken only by whispers spreading through the decks. Some soldiers lowered their weapons immediately. Others looked at each other in panic. Fear had spread, and Daniel had planted it deep. The commander snarled and tried to rise, but Daniel pressed him back down, the blade biting lightly against his throat. "Sit," Daniel ordered. The commander obeyed, his eyes burning with hate. Daniel took a breath and straightened. He knew. This was the final move, the moment where everything balanced on his next choice. He could steer the ship back to Earth and hand it to his people. He could crash it into the heart of the alien empire. Or he could turn their greatest weapon against them in ways they never imagined. His eyes narrowed. He would not let fear or rage guide him. He would choose with clarity, with purpose. The commander hissed, his pride breaking into desperate words. "You cannot hold this ship forever. They will send fleets. They will come for you. They will hunt you down." Daniel's lips curved into a cold smile. "Then let them come," he said. "Let the galaxy see what happens when you try to cage a human." His voice grew stronger, filled with unshaken resolve. "You call me hostage, you call me prey, but I am the hunter now, and you have nowhere to run." The crew looked at him, their eyes wide, their bodies frozen between obedience and fear. The commander remained silent, trapped by the human's grip. And Daniel, standing tall in the heart of their ship, knew the truth. He had turned the tables. What began as capture had become control, or what began as chains had become a knife at the throat of an empire. The control deck was his, the ship was his, and the future was his to command. The silence stretched across the room, heavy and sharp, as the crew waited for his final order. Damn Daniel, the human who was once their prisoner, prepared to show the galaxy that no cage could ever hold his kind.